Welcome to our second episode of Coffee with Samso. I've got Paul Werndly here with me.
Yes.
And we've got a slightly different topic here, but I think once the conversation go along, we'll sort of figure out how it sort of fits into how the business world and everything else. So, Paul, maybe you could just quickly introduce yourself and we'll get on the show.
Thanks. Thanks, Noel. And thanks for the delicious coffee as well. Beautiful. I graduated as a naturopath, or a doctor of natural medicine, in 1996. That encompasses food as medicine, herbal medicine, clinical nutrition, and disease process, metabolism, homeopathy. Even get to read the central nervous system, Chinese nail and tongue diagnosis. I learned Ayurvedic Chinese diet, ancient Greek diet. Then I went into lecturing very soon after that. So I did 12 years lecturing in college. I became a lecturer quite quickly for a graduate. Did 12 years of lecturing. And the whole time I've been a consultant as well. So that's really my bread and butter. A low GI bread and butter, I should say.
Yeah.
Is consulting people on their diet, nutrition. And I'm working with restaurants and cafes, like I work with No Menu.
Yep.
And I also work with Smart Collective, a few different companies. I sort of freelance myself around where I work with cafes, restaurants, healthcare centres, food stores, because one of the areas I've really specialised in is food as medicine, and that's now evolved into me being a specialised health food chef.
Okay.
Cool. So I cook specialty health foods and recipes and do instructional classes and talks and seminars even.
Yeah.
There's a real brief.
Yeah. Well, I met Paul last week over a function at No Menu.
Yes.
And we talked about how about low GI and things like that, and I'm sort of working with Hollister, who do make low GI products. So that's where our interest sort of came about. Yes. So maybe let's start with, everyone talks about low GI. I remember I was going back a few years now, had a personal trainer who talked about low GI and things like that. It just sort of flirted in and out of understanding of what it is. I mean, it's pretty straightforward when you sort of hear it.
Yes, when it's simplified.
Then when you practice it, it becomes a little bit forgetful and, well, we use the word complicated, but you just sort of get sort of confused in some ways. But anyway, correct. So let's start that. Maybe give us a rundown of what is GI, and then what is low and high, and how does that work? Yeah,
keep it simple, because the simplest concepts of anything are easy to grasp, but humans have a great habit of making things too complex and too dynamic. So if I just explain that Glycemic Index, the GI, is actually a measurement of how fast sugar enters your body from eating it. And it's normally it's a 0 to 100 scale. That's really a yardstick, almost like on a car. You got 0 to 100 kilometres. So the 100 is high, but there's actually foods that are higher, like jelly beans, one of the highest at 140. And then they got 0, would be something that's got no carbohydrate or sugar in it at all. Water would be 0, like pure rainwater would be 0. So then you got basically low glycemic is 0 to 54. That's low. Okay, 1 to 54 is classed as low glycemic index. 55 to 69 is mid glycemic, and 70 to 100 is classed as high. But if a food's 68, it's still high. It's on the high end of mid, you see. So there's a cut-off point there that they've made to say low, medium, or high. It's similar to speed limits, low speed, high, etc. So like I said, hundreds was measured on glucose. So they got some glucose, put it in water, dissolved it, drank it, and they tracked the graph of your blood sugar for 2 hours. And that was set at 100, because they needed a yardstick. Yeah. So that's your yardstick to 100 and that's high GI. Like I said, anything over 70 is high, classed as high. And then basically they then experimented with around 50 grams of each food, and mostly carbohydrate based and sugar based. But sometimes there's carbohydrates or sugars in foods you wouldn't think there is, so you've got to consider the whole scope of diet and nutrition. So they then tracked the blood sugar curve for about 2 hours after eating 50 grams of white rice or naan bread or white bread or a soft drink, or orange juice, apple juice. Like apple juice is quite high.
Okay.
Quite high. Some apple juices are higher than soft drinks because you've got the fruit from the apple, and then you've got the sugar they put in as well. So it's a double sugar. So some foods are double and triple sugars.
Okay.
Which
Would that be the same for orange juice and any juices of that nature?
Correct. Because if you get an orange off a tree, they're quite sweet. But if you get some orange juice and had that straight after, it's sweeter. So when the no added sugar thing is a bit of a worry there, because it usually means that the manufacturer who's put the orange juice in the bottle or the apple juice in the bottle hasn't added the sugar, but the factory that's crushed the apples, who they bought it off, has added the sugar. So, but there's no added sugar just means we haven't added it.
It's a bit like the organic concept, isn't it? You plant the tree organically, but the guy that you bought the property from stuffed it up with fertilizer and your plants, your pesticides, and your organic fruit tree or whatever is nourishing itself from the pesticides that's underneath.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. So, like I said, there's always exceptions to the law, but that's the basics of the glycemic index, and it's very scientific, and it's really and it does slightly vary from person to person because your body metabolizes sugars and carbohydrates differently depending on your own metabolism.
Yeah. I mean, from an Asian point of view, we love our curry. When we have curries, we've got to have rice, and that's one of the things that happens when I see curry on the table. So from that point of view, how do we go about having our favourite food and still try and keep a low GI target?
Very good question, Noel. That's actually, everything has a substitute, everything. So if you think curry and rice, the highest rice glycemically would be about 77, 79, which is in the high category, but the lowest is black rice at 42. And one thing you can do there is mix the white rice with the white rice. White rice, some of the white rice is the highest. And the thing is, brown rice sits at 50, right, which is in the moderate level. And partly that is it's got the husk on it. So the husk actually gets in the way of the carbohydrate absorption, and that doesn't stress the organs. Because one thing with the glycemic index, with the higher glycemic foods, is the organs, our metabolic organs, start stressing to handle the rapid rise of blood sugar, specifically the pancreas and the liver. So you got quinoa is at 53. Remember 55 is going into now moderate. Red rice is 55, right on 55. Wild rice is 45. So what you can do, and this is what I do with a lot of clients, you maybe have the lentils, which are 32. And now lentils are quite starchy, but they've got a lower absorption rate.
Okay.
So it's like I said, some things don't really match. Lentils are really high in carbohydrates, but it's because the carbohydrates in the lentils are more a complex nature, so it takes longer for the digestive system to break it down and enter the body, whereas Coca-Cola, boom, sugar, straight into the body. So you can still have your rice, you can blend it, or go for the more holistic, natural rices, because you remember white rice has been processed. And when humans normally process something from nature, they normally downgrade its health benefit. So you get beautiful, fresh, organic rice taken to a factory, husked and bleached and powdered, and normally that would be a slight off in nutritional and health benefit. Same as a cannery. You know, if you take the peach from the tree and eat it, that's good for you. You take that to a cannery and pulverise it, crush it and put it in a can. It's removing it from its natural form.
In terms of sticking with rice, because it's sort of a common thing.
Yeah.
I mean, companies like Hollister and CSR and Sunrise, they're putting out these low GI products. How does that? Well, what's your opinion of it, or what's your thoughts on those products?
Well, low GI is good. Well, some of it's been modified genetically, and others have been, they've just added different carbohydrates or chosen a rice strain that's got lower, more complex carbohydrate, which, like I said, with lentils, that it takes longer to break that carbohydrate down in the digestive system, so there's a slower release into the bloodstream. So, and same with the low GI, some low GI sugars. They're putting some more complex carbohydrates and even molasses back into the sugar. So sticking with rice you do have a lot of low GI rices coming out now, or lower GI. The highest white rice would be 78, which is high. The lowest white rice would be in the late 50s, which is moderate. So that's without even moderating it.
Yeah, yeah.
So once again, you can get the moderate GI rice, mix it with 50-50 with quinoa, and you're bringing it down. You see, you can actually, through your preparation techniques in the kitchen, moderate something's GI yourself. Okay. So a lot of these products are fantastic though, because diabetes is an epidemic, and I'd say growing in the world scale, and it's even the countries you wouldn't even think of diabetes being quite high, like Japan never used to have high diabetes. It's skyrocketing at the moment in those countries, and so the low GI rice puts less strain on your organs, so therefore you don't get the metabolic disease over time. That's in a basic nutshell.
And I sort of put some notes down here. I mean, in terms of sticking with the Malaysian sort of theme, and I guess Indian, you have the rotis and the naans and things. So that would be the same thing as rice, isn't it? You can sort of blend that with alternative, like lentils or brown rice or brown flour in that sense. Would that be something that's...
That's a great question as well, because if you think of it like if you have a curry, now if you've got potato in that curry as part of the body of the curry, then you've already got a carbohydrate. Then if you have that with rice, you've got another carbohydrate. And then you have it with roti or naan, then you've got more carbohydrates. So the idea there is to take the potato out of your vegetable curry, use more sweet potato, broccoli, onions, that sort of thing. So all your vegetables are low GI, and mushrooms are very low. The mushroom family is one of the lowest. Then just have the curry and naan, or curry and rice, not curry with naan and rice, because naan and roti can be up to 75, 78 GI. But a whole wheat roti down to 62. And if it's made with chickpea flour, because chickpeas is in the same family as lentil, that can drop it even further, because chickpeas are a more complex carbohydrate. So your white flour is your highest. And the thing is that if blood sugars are coming in really skyrocketing into your blood, your body's got to produce insulin to cut off that blood sugar from going any higher. Because this is where diabetics sort of lack that insulin metabolism. So if insulin isn't blocking the sugars, if it keeps on going, we're in trouble. The blood can go thick and we can actually go into a coma. So that's what insulin's for. So always having high GI food, the body's always got to produce insulin from the pancreas. And that puts a burden on the pancreas as an organ to control sugars all the time. And you think if you have cereal in the morning, high GI, insulin release. You might have a muffin for morning tea, insulin release. A roll for lunch, insulin release. People can have insulin and high GI foods 4, 5, 6 times a day. That might be all right if it was one day, but over many days and many years, there's a metabolic disease. Weight gain, diabetes is just around the corner.
I mean, it's interesting, diabetes. I just had a quick look at some figures. I remember someone mentioning it to me. Like in China, there's like 10% of the population now have diabetes, and I think like 37 or some high figure are pre-diabetes.
Yep.
So if you take that in percentage of the population, you're talking about like 300 million people with this kind of issues.
Huge.
I mean, from a market point of view, from a corporate point of view, I think it probably opens up quite a big space for these guys to play in, to bring in this low GI food. I mean, let's face it, when you talk to an Asian bloke, he's going to eat rice, carbohydrates.
Yes.
Talk to an Italian or European, they're going to eat pasta and all these kind of stuff. Yeah. So you sort of very hard to get them out of that. They're not going to stop eating pasta, or rice, for example. So I think in some ways I see that this is opening up quite a big opportunity for these guys. I mean, that's why you're seeing our Sunrise. I mean, coming in with low GI rice, and CSR's got the low GI sugar.
Yep.
Hollister's got their pastas and their noodles, and they've got the low GI sugar too, I think.
Yep.
So it's interesting. In your sort of journey in what you do you see this as you see it more now than before? Do you see that?
Yeah, well, so these low GI products and companies are very avant-garde, and they're actually forward-thinking and forward-moving, because like diabetes, you see 10% of the Chinese population is still massive numbers.
Yeah,
Be in the 30 million or something like that.
Yeah.
Plus, that's just, and pre-diabetes is common. Actually, a lot of people got pre-diabetes without knowing it. And as a therapist, I can interview someone and see just from their symptoms alone, their nails, their tongue and their eyes, whether they've got pre-diabetes. It's very, very common. I mean, diabetes is almost in plague proportions. But if you look at traditional Japanese and Chinese diet, rice was their only carb. Yeah. Now with the influx of infiltration of Western diet, and also these sauces, you know, you got your oyster sauce, would have been just stewed oysters and some soy sauce, etc.
Yeah.
Now it's got all the sugars and you got sweet sauces and all that. And plus the Western diet coming in with your big companies, McDonald's and all that coming in. Now rice isn't their only carbohydrate, and now they're starting to eat pastas and junk food, etc. That's where the diabetes is really, and pre-diabetes, which is more of a plague, people just don't know, is really spiking in those countries that always had low diabetes and low pre-diabetes, and the health risks associated with diabetes and pre-diabetes is massive, because they're pretty well metabolic syndromes. And once you've got a metabolic syndromes, the knock-on effects to your health and your aging is hard to quantify. There's so many different diseases and illnesses, blood pressures, cholesterol problems, sleep problems, energy problems, fatigue, depression. The knock-on effects phenomenal. So, and you look at the traditional Mediterranean diet, really your pizza base or your pasta was really one of the, in the very traditional ancient Greek diet, it wasn't very carbohydrate loaded. The Western diet, unfortunately, has got pasta, potato, rice, fruit juices, fruits, sugars, sweets. You got all your carbohydrate family is sugars, starch and alcohol. That's your whole carbohydrate family, plus fibre. So the fibre in the lemons, for instance, is actually classed as a carbohydrate family. But you've got sugar, starch, alcohol. Now if you just take alcohol out, for instance, sugar and starch, the sugar and starch representation in our diet is way too overrepresented.
Okay.
But if rice was back in traditional Japanese and Chinese diet, if rice was your only carbohydrate, plus I was working with a Japanese chef only a few weeks ago, and he showed me the portions of rice he has with his vegetables, and it was only like a cooked rice, that is, not even uncooked. It was only just this much. You're showing. So that portion control is also important.
Yeah, I think in the commercial world, I guess when you have the Japanese foods that we eat now, they load the rice up because they don't put the other stuff, then you get full and you go, that's a nice meal, but you actually got full with the rice.
Like a cheap filler.
Yeah.
It is a cheap filler. Yeah. Same with the sushi. I make, as part of my healthy cooking, I make sushi without the rice. I have the salmon, the avocado, the mayonnaise. I check the sugar in the mayonnaise, because mayonnaise, traditional mayonnaise shouldn't have sugar in it, but they put sugar in it because it's a cheap bulk up. And you put your baby spinach and your pickled ginger and all that, and you wrap it up like that, and it's absolutely beautiful. Because with the main sushi you buy in the shops, it's got all this rice and a little bit of filling in the middle. That filling in the middle is my main bulk of my sushis. Okay. And they're absolutely, that's where the flavour is.
Well, one of the things I found was that 90% of all diabetic horses, they are type 2 diabetics, type 2 style, I guess. In some ways, you, a lot of people say the causes, and there's obviously diet and exercise, you know. And a lot of these, the type 2 is not so serious. Type 1's a bit, you know, on the serious side. I mean, you've talked about, you know, the different things that we eat from before and now. That's diet. You know, I guess a lot of people also have this exercise issue, that they don't go out and do the exercise. That creates this, like you said, the knock-on effect, you know. If you have those kind of issues, then you're tired, you're this and that, and don't feel like exercising. So I mean, in case of low GI, do you think that it's a cultural thing, or is this, you think it's just because we're so international now that we get the influence from the Western to the Eastern, vice versa? Like you said, you know, we start eating more carbohydrates, right? Is the incidence or the decrease in incidence going to be affected by cultural background, do you think?
Yeah, because your traditional diet would suit your DNA and your metabolism. But if that now borders are a lot more fluid now, and you know, with import, export, etc., you get all foods coming from all over the world. So if you grew up on a Polynesian island, for example, you would have had coconuts, fish, limes. That would have been your traditional diet. Now, if you start importing sauces with sugars in them and juices, you know, etc., diabetes will instantly, or pre-diabetes will instantly go up on those islands because it's outside your natural what you've evolved with. So if you stick to your principles of, you know, the Mediterranean diet's one of the best diets in the world if it's adhered to, but then in those areas now there is fast food chains and etc. And you said 90% of diabetes is type 2, as you mentioned. About 90% of all diabetes is type 1 and type 2. Type 1 you're really born with. It's a malfunction in the cells of your pancreas that doesn't produce the insulin in the first place. But type 2 is actually, we pretty well cause ourselves. It's late onset. So once we've caused that, and it's caused by diet, which is carbohydrate excess. There's a lot of fad diets now. Some of them aren't going to be fad diets, by the way, where they're pretty well carbohydrate free. There's no carbohydrates in them at all, or very low. Your total caloric intake for the day or the week, carbohydrates represent 10% or 5% or less of that total caloric intake, which is about where it should be. And that around 5-10% of your total caloric intake for the day, week, or year would instantly put you outside of certain disease risk straight away. And then, therefore, you're not even looking at type 2 diabetes. And you can actually even, at 5% caloric intake of carbohydrate, and you make it that low GI, that's even better, then you're actually looking at, you can even reverse pre-diabetes. It can disappear.
Yeah.
You can actually start reversing.
Type 2 you're talking about?
Yeah, that's type 2, because type 1 you're born with, and you're insulin dependent right from infant.
Right. All right, I think that's a mouthful for us for today, Paul, but thank you for coming. And I mean, I when we spoke initially, I think, you know, we sort of agreed that it was a really interesting topic. It's sort of wide-ranging. You know, everybody that we speak to is affected by it in some ways or another. Yeah. You know, whether you're a professional, non-professional, or different cultures. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming and having a chat and sharing your thoughts with us.
Yes.
But we will look forward to maybe doing something more. You know, we could expand on some of the things. I mean, you've got a lot of talk just before we started. You started talking to us about lemons being a superfood, and my weed in my garden that's a nettles and
stinging nettle.
like and you know, it's really interesting. You know, we sort of should have started a lot earlier, but we got caught up talking about all these other stuff. But so thank you, Paul, for coming.